Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, for that very warm introduction. It's indeed a pleasure for me to be here with you at Liverpool University. And I'm sorry?
There's two universities.
Oh, really?
John Moores University. I'm very sorry about that.
It's completely separate from Liverpool University. Maybe I've been around quick. Okay. Talk about putting my foot in my mouth. Okay. I hope my talk is a bit more appropriate as we go along. But it's good to be here for Black History Month, which, as I was mentioning with one of the reporters earlier on, we need Black History Month year-round for us as African people, and I think obviously Black history should be part of history in general. And I've entitled my talk, An Introduction to African Humanism. My voice seems to be going back and forth. Maybe I started talking too early this morning. But I hope everybody can hear me in the back, right? Not a problem. Okay, good. Well, let me start over. It's good to be here at John Moores University. The greatest achievement of humanity was the knowledge of self, the knowledge of the universe, and the unitary relationship of one to the other, giving rise to the understanding that as humanity, the highest evolutionary level of life, we were at home in the universe. This was systematized and taught in the universities of the first and greatest civilization, Kemet, as the name implies, the land of black people. Now we call it Egypt. The oldest archaeological evidence of modern humanity, Homo sapiens sapiens, was found in Ethiopia and is approximately 200,000 years of age. The oldest found outside of Africa in Europe dates to approximately 40,000 years ago and is Negroid in type. The earliest Caucasians found in Europe date to 20,000 years ago, and the earliest Mongolians in Asia to 15,000 years ago. So for 150,000 years, humanity consisted only of Africans. Our experience and knowledge created the first culture, and in approximately 4000 BC, the first civilization, Kemet, in the area of Africa that is now called Egypt. This is the beginning of Nile Valley civilizations, which included Nubia and Kush, as well as Kemet. In observing oneself, the Kemetians produced the first and most penetrating mental science in the psychosocial tale. I'm not sure. Can I get a little water? I'm not sure what's going on with my voice. In the psychosocial tale of Ausar, Auset, Seth, Nephthys, and Heru, the 5 aspects of consciousness and enlightened intent. The first religious and philosophical texts of the world are the pyramidal and coffin texts. The first book on virtues, ethics, and social justice are the Book of Declaration of Virtues, Tahotep, Kun Anu, and others. A non-dual cosmology was created that was their understanding of their relationship to the universe. It was the basis for all their sciences and the art of living, which was not separate, but was one integrated science of life in which all parts were interrelated, interconnected, and interdependent. These principles of cosmology, psychology, thank you so much, Garvey. These principles of cosmology, psychology, philosophy, and religion were taught at Thebes, Hermopolis, Memphis, and Heliopolis. At Thebes, it was taught that Amun was the sole creator God, and God was called Nature, which, as As you can imagine, nature comes from nature. And that all other divine functions, that is Neteru, and the material universe were manifestations of this imperceptible essence. So we have Amun, which is consciousness, Ra, which is creative energy, and Ptah, which is creative intelligence. This was the first divine Trinity: omnipresence, omnipotence, and omniscience. So the three in one. So monotheism is intrinsic to African religion and did not begin with Semites. The psychological principles by which consciousness functions as mind in the universe are elaborated in the widespread story of Ausar, Auset, Seth, Nephthys, and Heru. Ausar, Auset are the non-dual halves of consciousness. That is, consciousness of itself as Ausar, and consciousness of all things as they are as Auset. So that's the non-dual consciousness that we have as human beings. Seth is the ego, Nephthys is dualistic awareness, and Horus, that is the king, the master of mind, who restores the kingdom of non-dual conscious presence after battling with Seth. So in this cosmology, we have a continuous link between the Trinity, that is God, Amun, Ta, and Ra, the divine essence, through Thoth or Tehuti, which is intuitive wisdom, with human consciousness, that is Ausar, Auset. That is unconditional consciousness or absolute reality. The above can be summed up in an African cosmology that states, out of the total field of experience, the non-localizable realm of genuine reality, that is a vast expanse, that is Amun, the supreme ordering principle of the universe, which is Ma'at, manifest, reflecting the deep structure of what is. In this realm, which is an immense area of light, which is Ra, she communicates by activating an indestructible cognitive responsiveness, that is Ptah, out of this ever-fresh awareness, which is his own primordial state and that of the 5 primordial essences of mind. This process then proceeds into the dimension of the full richness of being, which communicates its message through its own medium in the material dimension. The practitioner of this natural state of total completeness is Heru, the Karast meaning the anointed one, and it's been transliterated as Christ. So we have the divine king and the enlightened one, the anointed one, the Karast, which has come down to us as Jesus the Christ. And we should understand that the last name of Jesus is not Christ, it's Jesus of Nazareth, but it's Jesus the Christ, Jesus meaning the enlightened one, who was one of the enlightened people over time. The understanding of self and the universe and the relationship between the two, personified as Ma'at, which is balance, order, truth, harmony, and interdependence, permeated Kemetic society and was responsible for the greatness and longevity of their civilization. These teachings spread around the world and in Africa on the continent itself, and gave rise to Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, Sufism, Gnosticism, Ubuntu, to name a few that represent an understanding of the full dimensions of consciousness. Over the centuries, the original teachings were often misunderstood and became distorted and misinterpreted, giving rise to religions, belief systems, dualistic ideologies that people could identify with, and so enhance their false sense of self. So man over time made God in his own image. Scientific materialism revolted against this domination by a God of faith and mystery from the Renaissance onward, with a model that proposed that the universe was a lifeless collection of particles bouncing against each other, obeying predetermined rules. That is the Newtonian model. The cosmos spreading from nothingness 16 billion years ago in a Big Bang and has been expanding ever since. Well, one may ask, well, what happened before the Big Bang? What caused it? What is matter expanding into? How does matter create life? How does matter create consciousness? According to Darwin, life forms of unknown origin proceed to change form due to chance and random mutations. Hence, there is no order in the universe and no explanation of how intelligence enters the universe, and no understanding of how a group of molecules in your brain can create consciousness. It turns out that the matter that we know about is only 4% of the universe. The rest is dark matter and dark energy. That is, 96% of matter is unexplainable by materialistic science and philosophy. So physicists, with their grand theories of parallel universes and string theory, have not solved the central mystery of knowledge. How did laws of the world produce the observer, that is us, in the first place? Their theories have no relationship to human experience and are not possible to prove experimentally. Along comes quantum physics of Max Planck and Niels Bohr and others, Heisenberg, in the 1930s with the uncertainty principle, as Einstein called it, spooky action at a distance, and the intrusion of consciousness into the behavior of fundamental particles. An electron turns out to behave as both a particle and a wave. The observer appears to alter and determine what is perceived, and where a particle will be located remains dependent upon the very act of observation. So what we perceive as reality is a process that involves our consciousness. This then requires a total paradigm shift, as consciousness and its actions are not a primary part of Western science, religion, philosophy, or sociology. To reinterpret the implications of this science, we recognize the indeterminacy of free action. Our ancestors call this Atum Ra, which is the free will of the creative principle, as fundamental to process, rather than physical law being fundamental to existence. Laws, that is Neteru, are the scaffold for the construction of life, which is universal processing, the manifestation of the one nature, Amun Ra Patah. So the quantum of action, which is Atum Ra, as universal process, is contiguous to the quantum of consciousness, which is Heru, in their actions in the world. The quantum of consciousness functions in the here and now. The present is outside of time and is where all action takes place, the real fourth dimension. We have hereby shown that the unified field theory of our ancestors, that is at least 6,000 years old, is as new as quantum physics and is the new paradigm, the basis for restoring our rightful place in the universe in a well-ordered society according to Martin principles. Whatever happened in the past as memory can only be remembered in the present. And when the future comes, it will be in the present. So we only really live in the present. So life itself is a successive eternity of now moments and an infinity of here. Wherever you go, there you are. Full conscious present in the present moment. If we are fully conscious in the present moment, our individual consciousness is one with universal consciousness. And the quantum of action as our consciousness will take place in the open dimension outside space-time. That is the fourth dimension. The primeval Nu, as our ancestors called it, we now can call it the quantum soup. So we live our life in the open dimension, Nu, where all experience takes place. This is also now called the unified field. We have the conscious moment guiding the quantum of action. This is the process of life, and through evolution has produced from the original template of Amun, Ra, and Ptah in the human form in a material universe Osar, Oset, and Heru, which is our conscious selves. That is, we are made in the image of God. The practitioner of the natural state of total completeness, that is Heru, the Karas, the Anointed One, the Divine King, also known as Jesus or the Christ, or as Sakyamuni, the Buddha, or as Lao Tzu, originator of the Tao, and several other, of course, enlightened beings. That's what the Christ means, the Karas, enlightened. This understanding of self and the universe and the relationship between the two, personified as Ma'at, balance, order, truth, harmony, and independence, permeated Egyptian society and was responsible for their greatness and the longevity of their civilization. Ma'at was the creative principle laid down by divinity at the first time. In nature, it represented the orderliness of events. Day follows night, the moon waxes and wanes, the stars have fixed positions in the sky, the Nile overflows at the rainy season to water the plants and nourish the population. In the individual, it represented self-understanding, righteousness, truth, generosity, patience, effort, creativity, perfectibility in community. In society, it meant justice, order, law, harmony, a moral culture that sustains individual ethical values, the principle of impartiality and equity, and allows the ontological potential of the person to be perfectible. After all, we're not born in sin. We're made in the image of our God, that is nature. There is no psychological, ontological, or epistemological gap between us and our source, that is divinity. Therefore, we need no outside agency for salvation, no religious anthropology. Also, we need no Marxian dialectic for guidance. After all, Marxism was constructed in the libraries of London to counter rapacious capitalism. There is no free market, and there's no free trade. We need only a Trinitarian, Marxian dialectic laid down at the first time that unifies life, the person, and the society in an ongoing communication and dialogue to co-create with the divine principle, Ma'at, the righteous person and the just society. With this ethos, we can go forward with the necessary praxis to create the political, economic, religious, educational, and civic institutions that will bring about the necessary transformation for a new, old humanism that was birthed on the African continent. My father said, God and nature first made us what we are. Then out of our own creative genius, we make ourselves into what we want to be. The starting point is the understanding that we can transform ourselves. We can work on our mind to change the way we experience ourselves and the world. We're born with the necessary equipment to live lives that are satisfactory and fulfilling, and to function in harmony with others and with nature. After all, we're made in the image of God. So we are equipped with spiritual presence, creativity, and energy, like a drop of water is to the ocean of omnipresence, omniscience, and omnipotence. So each one of us has the potential to develop our natural qualities and abilities that we already have as our natural human endowment to the maximum. That should be our purpose in life. If you decide to make this effort, it will give a profound direction to your life, resulting in a mind of awakening. A mind that is awake to its full potential, knowing who you are, what you are, the way things are, and what you should do under all circumstances. That is your responsibility. With a strong sense of purpose and determination, we can work towards our awakening, recognizing that the way out is through wisdom. And wisdom is the experience of knowing oneself and discovering your through nature, through insight. So we start with ourselves and we become the change that we want to see, then perhaps following your example, friends and family may change, then others at a distance, and soon we will have created the just society, the new paradigm, the old, new African humanism, and then the world will change. I think we see that this is of extreme importance as the old Eurocentric paradigm, if you will, certainly for the last 500 years, has not given us a society that is safe, prosperous, and equitable. As a matter of fact, what it has given us is pretty much a chaos, which is war after war after war, World War I, World War II, 75 million dead, the Korean War, the Vietnamese War, war in Afghanistan, war in Libya, war in Syria, now we have the war in Ukraine. And you can't get peace by making war. And you can't build equitable societies by destroying them. So we see that the industrialization process of the West using up sustainable resources is leading us to catastrophe. We're despoiling the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, the food that we eat. We're piling up garbage in the oceans, we're acidifying the oceans. We're destroying ourselves in terms of the non-nutritious foods that we create. And of course, we're creating global warming and heading for a collapse of the ecosystem. So we do need a new paradigm. And I've outlined the paradigm of African humanism, which I think is the paradigm for the future. Thank you very much. I don't know how you do this.
We'll do it just like this, Dr. Garvey. Good morning, everybody. Thank you. Well, my mind has just gone. I'm sure some of yours have too. But it's really interesting how you bring that academic response back to who we are as people and our responsibility.
Oh, sorry about that.
Okay.
I think my voice did last.
It just lasted.
It just lasted.
You did really well. Thank you so much. It's just a great pleasure to have you here and to have you here in the city, Dr. Garvey.
Not at Liverpool University.
Well, there are some of them in here. You're in Liverpool John Moores University, so you've got John Moore students, you've got Liverpool University students, you've got Hope University students, you've got young people from various schools, so you've got Blue Coat School, you've got Cardinal Heenan, if you've got anybody else, so you've got quite a plethora of different people here in the room.
What school are you from? You were listening, I can tell.
At Liverpool University.
Ah, there you go. Thank you for being here. You didn't make me so silly.
So you've got a real mix of people, a real mixed audience here. So obviously at the minute we haven't really touched on any of the work of your father or yourself as a...
Well, if there are any questions or statements or anything.
By heart. Might be coming for more information at some point. Has anybody got any questions surrounding...
Statements, comments, whatever.
With me, let me just make sure these are on. One, two.
Yeah, it's a young lady.
Questions, just put your hands up. Use your hands up.
Always use this as an opportunity. Let people know you're in the room. Always ask a question. I was always told that in terms of networking. Don't be forgotten.
If you could give one bit of advice to our young students, not university students, the students that are still in school, on how they can create, what steps they can take to create a more just society, achievable steps, what would they be?
Well, basically, I sort of end up saying something like that, which is, self-knowledge is the most important knowledge. So you have to focus initially on knowing yourself. And it's important to have the understanding that you are made with all of the equipment that you need to do anything that you really feel that you want to do. because those things are there in parallel. The things that you want to do are based on the qualities and the potential that you have. In other words, if you like music, it's because you have the potential to be a musician. If you like science, it's because you have the potential to be a scientist. If you like literature, reading books or whatever, or writing, that's because you have that particular potential. So it's important for you to understand the gifts that you have are phenomenal. As Homo sapiens, if we believe what they've told us, it's been 16 billion years of evolution that it has taken to produce us as conscious animals, meaning animals that are conscious of ourselves, and the only animals that are able to really choose our behavior. So that's our responsibility, is to choose our behavior. So this is what we have to do, but we have to get to that awareness of self, not just be caught up in the conditioning. You see, because all of us are conditioned right from, babies, by our parents, and then by the school system. Of course, by the university system, our religion, and so on. They're all conditioning us with beliefs. And that's what our mind is. Our mind is a collection of conditioned responses. So very often we function in automatic pilot. We don't really function being aware. And my friend here is a Buddhist, a couple of Buddhists up front here. And this is what is important. People, the meditation, people call it mindfulness. But awareness is of prime importance. Because if you're not aware, and I talked about the present moment, then things just go by. And again, it's automatic pilot. And you're not functioning fully as a human being. Because to function fully as a human being, you have to be aware of yourself, you have to be aware of what is happening, and then you have to choose your response to what is happening. And that's where you're not a victim of the society. You become somebody that creates the environment in which you live, and that's how you transform both yourself and the society around you. So awareness is important. Awareness of your potential, and therefore awareness of your ability to do whatever. Therefore, your purpose in life, therefore you can fulfill your purpose in life, and that gives meaning to life. Yes,
Hi,
yeah.
Dr. Julius, lovely listening to you talk. I'm Ashra Elliott. I've got a youth project called the Retain Project.
Called it
Called the Retain Project.
retain.
Retain.
Go back, retain.
Return. Okay, your accent fooled me a bit.
The
Okay.
recipe we hand is directly through your father, Marcus Garvey.
Sure.
So we want to get African diaspora young people from Liverpool to go to Africa for a 1-week international study visit, and for them to go back, find their culture and various other things, build up their self-esteem, their group self-esteem and their individual self-esteem, come back and do positive action. How do you feel we'll be able to mobilise our young people and also to spark interest from the rest of our community to make it happen? Because we have support from Birmingham City Council, who have asked us to come and speak, and they're paying us so we can donate to our project. But a wider interest from the rest of the country, because it's a big task that we're trying to do. How can we mobilise the youth first to get involved, and also just get the interest of the wider community?
Well, in terms of the youth, it's a matter of education. It's important for us to know our history, to know our traditions, to know where we came from. So what you're talking about is of extreme importance, because that's part of what was taken away from us in terms of the process of enslavement. If you saw the movie there with Kunta Kinte and so on, what's my name, not everything was taken away, even your name, and you're given a new name, as if to say you didn't exist, or you had no history, you had no past, etc., etc. So that's what we suffer from in terms of our community, a lack of identity. in terms of who we are and what we have done and what we have been in the past. So it's a matter of education, educating the young people to understand. That's why I started out with that history in terms of Nile Valley civilization and Homo sapiens 200,000 years ago. Most kids don't know that. You see that they don't understand the whole evolutionary process, which goes back 15 billion years and so on and so forth. So history is a long business. It's not 500 years, or it's not, last year or whatever. So you need to start within the community, and that's what one of the things my father did. He was very prolific in terms of his own, oratory, but also his newspaper, the Negro World, so that you can use whatever communication media you have within the community, and certainly now we have social media, so that's a way to spread the message relatively easier, and you can show YouTube things about Africa and so on. There's so many things on YouTube in terms of African history. They'll be very excited about it if they see it. And that's the important thing, to get them to see it, to understand that they come from, tremendous history and civilization that dates back, to 4000 BC and so on. That's of extreme importance, and they'll want to go back and sample it, et cetera, et cetera. So as far as the wider community, now that's a different thing, and you have to talk to the counselor here, Eddie and so on, how to influence the wider community to support it. That's a different problem.
Thank you.
The young man on the right here. Oh.
Hi. Thank you, Dr. Garvey, for everything you've spoken on today. We're here from Liverpool Hope University, so we're very excited to hear from you. You were speaking on African humanism, and I was just wondering how you, in your own profession in medicine, were able to apply that, or advice that you would have for other people pursuing their degrees and professions in places where a lot of the education or the values are still heavily westernized and Eurocentric. So how would you apply African humanism in that way?
Yeah, it's an uphill battle. You refer specifically to medicine as my profession. And in some sense, my profession is somewhat simplistic because I was a surgeon. So you by and large, you go in and you take something out, and maybe you replace it or you don't, and you sew them up again. So it's very mechanical. It's not very humanistic in that sense, but of course you try to be humane in terms of your patients. But again, the Western paradigm is very different from African humanism in that sense, because that's a very natural paradigm in terms of our relationship with nature. But the Western paradigm believes that we can transform nature, that we know more than nature. And if you look at our medical system, it's not really a healthcare system, or it doesn't really support health. It treats diseases. And that's one of the problems that I've found. So I'm a little bit of a renegade in terms of the traditional healthcare system, because I believe that health begins in the mind in the first place, and that if your mind is at peace, under, you might say, all circumstances, then it will influence, certain secretions like serotonin, acetylcholine, and so on and so forth, which are healing and make you feel good about yourself, as opposed to if you're always anxious and afraid, and then you get the adrenaline and the noradrenaline, which causes vasoconstriction, coronary, spasms, and so on and so forth, and creates heart attacks. But, that's not practiced in our society. Our society is very, very full of stress. And then if you look at the disease processes, 85% of the diseases that we have now are lifestyle diseases, but we don't treat them as such in terms of transforming the lifestyle. Stress I just mentioned is a big problem, but 60% of the population is obese, We eat too much meat, we eat processed foods, high fructose corn syrup, hydrogenated fats, and so on and so forth. So, I'm kind of knocking the health system that I grew up in and I was a part of for 50 years. But it's a narrow view of health, which is a disease treatment system, as opposed to so many other ways to treat us in terms of, let's say, changing our diet to a plant-based diet. I believe that the Indian method of treatment is adequate. The Chinese methods of treatment, medical treatment, are adequate. Some of the treatments of Native Americans as well as Africans in terms of herbal medicines. Herbal medicines are extremely important. As a matter of fact, if you look at Western medicine, they've extracted so many active products from plants. But because it comes from plants, then they have to change a molecule or something like that to be able to patent it, to be able to sell it and make money. And then, of course, that's different from the natural product, and that causes side effects and so on and so forth. So it's quite an artificial system, I think, the Western system of medical care. I'm wondering a little bit, but in terms of answering your question, it's difficult to be truly humane within the Western environment, because the Western environment is one of individualism. The individual comes first, and it's one of competition, and it's one of greed, meaning that you satisfy, your five senses, and to the max, because that's how you're admired in your society. You drive the Mercedes or the BMW or the Bentley or whatever it is, you have a big house and so on. You wear fancy clothes, you go to Paris on your vacation or wherever. Our values are skewed in terms of materialistic accumulation of materialistic accomplishments. So this is why we need not the materialistic paradigm, but a more humane paradigm. But it's something you have to do as an individual, and it may be an uphill struggle. Whatever your environment is, it's probably going to be an uphill struggle. But you have to do it as an individual, to be honest with yourself and true to yourself.
Thank you.
Oh.
Hi. So thank you for that last question as well, and your answer. It sort of feeds into what I was asked. So I'm a lecturer here at John Moores University, and tomorrow I'm giving a lecture to some students about the concept of bodily autonomy. And
I'm sorry, a lecture about
bodily autonomy.
Bodily autonomy.
Yes.
Okay.
And part of that, one of the topics we're touching on is kind of the history of medicine, and the deeply racist kind of models that came through the development of Western medicine. So I was just wondering if I could appeal to you as a medical doctor to think about or tell us, do you feel that the medical profession environment has kind of shed any of that underpinning kind of racism, or maybe what changes you might have seen in your career as a vascular surgeon?
Yeah, I'm sure, in some sense things have improved. But as you know, it's been very, drastic over time. Certainly in the United States, all of you know about the Tuskegee experiment with syphilis and so on, people being infected but not being treated, just so they could determine the natural history of the disease and so on. And, so many people being sterilized and on and on and on. And if you look at the results of what has happened in the COVID crisis in the last 2 years, again in the States, that's my reference point, the highest mortality has been in, the African population in the United States of America. They're at the front line, and they're the ones who are most diseased, if you will, in terms of pre-existing conditions, because they don't have the medical care, they don't have the proper diet, and so on and so forth. So it's intrinsic and it's structural, and it continues. And it's not as naked as it was. People are doing experiments, but there's a significant degree of neglect or inability to access health care for minority communities. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I just had a question. Thank you. You were talking about working within an institution, and I think many of us do that from different positions. So in my experience,
as you were saying, white body culture has quite immediate and material effects on all bodies, but especially those that within culture are marked with race, sexuality, gender, disability, and non-normativity, also non-humanity. Perhaps my question is repeated, but as individuals fighting for our own awareness and those of others within institution, how can we continue to work when the institution is based on white body culture?
Yes, the thing is that one has to have the courage of one's convictions, and this is why it needs to get beyond an intellectual process. That's why I talked about awareness and self-knowledge. And you really have to have that kind of discipline, if you want to call it a significant, meditation schedule, so to speak, so that you really do understand your mind, you really do understand who you are, and you get down to the basics of yourself, beyond ego. And when you get to that level, then you have a certain degree of confidence in who you are as a person, and what it is that you want to do in terms of your own manifestation, in terms of your own life process. And when you have that certainty, then that gives you the courage to function, even if the environment is hostile, over time. And I think one can function without being, shall we say, revolutionary, meaning that overturning the system that you're involved in, meaning that you don't necessarily have to go along with the system. That might mean that you're not going to get promoted as fast as somebody else who is really into the system and willing to do this, that, and the other thing. That may be inhumane, but move them up to the top of the totem pole. And then you have to accept that as a limitation in terms of your own progress within the system. But you have the certainty and the conviction that you're doing the right thing in terms of who you are as a human being. And that's what's important. At the end of the day, you can say, well, I did my best in terms of, what it is that I wanted to do. So that's the accomplishment of that success, as opposed to an external determinant of what success means, a material determinant. Success is being who you are all the time.
If I may, and then we'll finish up. Just for the young people, really, when we consider, where we are in the universe, as you were talking about today, what have you learned in terms of growing up and the legacy of your father, in order that these young people can go off and do maybe some further research into his work and what's...
Well, this is the legacy of my father, rather than giving you, what he did over time. 100 years ago. I don't think that's as significant. Certainly it's significant in a history class, but it's not as significant. And that's why I put that, quotation in there, which is his quotation. He said, God and nature, more or less, gave you what you have. And then out of your own creative genius, you make yourself what you want to be. And that was what he did. He was poor in that sense, Afro-Jamaican peasant, growing up in the north coast of Jamaica. His trade was a printer, which he learned at age 13 from his godfather. So he had a trade. He was literate. He did a lot of reading, etc. He educated himself, from a very early age. When he moved from St. Anne's Bay and he moved to Kingston, he became, a head printer at one of the corporations there, which was Benjamin's, which made pharmaceutical products. But he was in charge of men who were much older than him. But because of his mastery of his trade, he was able to do that. And, he obviously had his own mission, and part of that was he educated himself. He'd go around with a dictionary in his pocket and learn five words every week, or, write sentences. He would participate in elocution contests. He would go and, watch the ministers on Sunday in terms of their presentations and learn, how to speak to a crowd and so on and so forth. And then inform himself about the politics of the day. And so it was a matter of self-development. That's what it's all about. You're given these talents, but you have to develop them. That's your responsibility. And that's, what my mother taught me and my brother, my father, and that's what he taught us, all of us as African people, to be self-reliant and to develop based on our own abilities and our own resources and create our own systems. And that's still true 100 years later, and will always be true, because it's a fundamental law of the universe. It's all about self-development. We have been given the tools, but we have to use them, we have to develop them.